Hey, welcome. So first of all, I would like to introduce our speaker today. So we have Paulo Dantas here. He will be presenting on how motivation works in education for teens and adults. I'll tell you a bit more about Paulo. Paulo is a director of pedagogy and product champion at Everybody Loves Languages and has been involved in language teaching for over 20 years as a teacher, teacher educator, course designer, materials writer, and course book editor. In the last few years, Paulo has explored ways in which technology and innovation impact teaching and learning and has developed apps, platforms, and other digital products for language learning and teacher education. As EdTech specialist, he has served as international expert panelist for the Horizon Report Higher Education International in 2016, 17, and 18, and its Brazilian version as well, Horizon.br. Having attended UFPE in social studies, Paulo holds a postgraduate certificate in teacher development from the University of Chichester and the Cambridge ESOL Delta. So thank you for being here with us, Paulo, and welcome.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Kari. Good afternoon or morning or evening. I said it's good evening for quite a few people. So thank you very much for making the effort and meeting us here this afternoon. Just a bit of housekeeping before we actually begin. We want to make this as interactive as possible. I see that most of you have found the chat and you've mentioned where you were from. So I see we have people from Turkey, from Mexico, from Colombia, from good old Brazil, from the US, Panama, pretty much everywhere really. So that's lovely. And I am going to ask you to use the chat quite often so that you can share your thoughts, your questions as well. I have a screen just with your chat right here, right next to me. So whenever you ask a question or make a remark, I'll be able to have a look at them. And in this way, we can make this a bit more interactive. Also, if I say something that you find relevant, just so that I know that I've hit the right note with you, I'm going to ask you to type in a bunch of W's like this in the chat, just so that I know that like we are on the same wavelength. We good with that? Waiting to see if we got any reactions. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Maria Jose. Good. All right, so as Kari said, today we're talking about how motivation works for both teens and adults. A lot of these things also apply to kids because you see that motivation is almost like a science and there's quite a lot of study around it. But it's interesting that we cannot talk about motivation without actually doing this first, right? So we need to first define motivation before we can talk about motivation. So can I ask you to share with me and with everyone else in a very short sentence in the chat box, what is motivation for you? How would you define motivation yourself? If you had to just finish the sentence, for me, motivation is da-da-da, what would your da-da-da be? I'll give you a minute to do this. Linking mind and knowledge. That's fancy, Cecilia. Good. Let's see what else we have. Okay, quite a few. So motivation is what makes us leave the bedroom in the morning. So in that case, and that would be a cup of coffee for me. The willingness to do something lovely. The motivation as the positive result becoming real. Good. Something that makes me go. One's drive to do something. Inspired, a force. Resilience, discipline. Willingness to do, okay. The engine that keeps me going and want to strive to be better. All right. The desire to do something. Okay. So as you can see, there is like, I think there are two conclusions that I can draw from your contributions so far. The first one is that motivation is a driving force, right? So that's the first one. And the second one, it seems to be that I think in most of the comments that I've seen, or pretty much in all of the comments that I've seen, you tend to associate motivation with a positive emotion, with a positive thing, right? A positive element. That's a very good definition there, Julian. So it's the internal drive or external stimulus that compels individuals to take action towards achieving a goal or fulfilling a need. Right. So you've nailed it. With that, we can all go home now. Please do stay. Well, as a matter of fact, we tend to see motivation as a positive thing. It's something that's intrinsically positive, right? But as a matter of fact, I don't know if you like detective stories. I'm very much addicted to Agatha Christie ever since I was, I think, a teenager. And one of the first things that a detective will try to identify whenever there is a crime is the motive, right? So motivation. So what's the reason? So what is it that compelled a individual or a group of individuals to act, right? So there are a few possible definitions for what motivation is in literature, and I'd like to share two of my favorite ones with you. So the first one, it comes from a management study guide by this woman called Prachi Janija. And she says that motivation is a psychological phenomenon that stimulates people to do things, very much in line with what many of you said in your own definitions in the chat, right? So it is first, I consider it's a psychological phenomenon, and it brings with it a certain force, a certain stimulus that will help us or encourage us to do something. That can be good, possibly, but it doesn't have to be good, right? So this is bottom line here. And the second definition, and it's a definition that I like the most, is the process that starts, guides, and most importantly, maintains behaviors that are geared toward the goal. So it's not just that initial spark. You have that initial spark, but it will also help you maintain that behavior. Every single 1st of January, I'm motivated to do a whole bunch of stuff. I'm motivated to cut back on the amount of caffeine I take. I'm motivated to definitely exercise more often and become a healthier human being. That motivation not often will be maintained after the end of the first week in January because life happens. So motivation then is that the process that will also help us maintain that behavior, right? And with that in mind, and over to you again, what is your motivation to be here? Why did you decide to pop in and join us for this webinar? If you would share that with us in get different strategies. Good, yeah. If we can get other motivations. A love for learning. Oh, we all have that motivation, don't we? We want to learn new things, different paths to plant a seed. Lovely. Oh, that's a big responsibility to renew your motor, Celia. Okay, try to bear that in mind. Some tips on how to deal with individuals from Generation Alpha. They are very challenging, right, Andrea? Professional development hours. Mildred, I'm with you. We all need that certificate. And if we learn something new while we are at it, that's definitely worth it. Yeah, so as you can see, we all have like positive motivations, positive elements that have brought us here today. And they all will stem from 3 key elements that, according to literature, they are the grounds for what motivation is. And that is true for kids, that is true for teens, and that is true for adults as well. And I think once we understand how these three pillars of motivation work, we can develop our own strategies considering our own groups, our own students. Each group will behave slightly differently depending on age, depending on where they are studying, depending on the time of the day they study, depending on how long they've been with you. So all of those variables will impact how people are motivated, right? But all of those variables, they will be controlled by these three key elements. The first one, and we'll talk about each and every one of them, is the idea of the locus of control. The second one is the idea of self-efficacy. And last but not least, and this is one of the most interesting ones, is the idea of learned helplessness. Right, so we are going to begin talking about locus of control. So what is this thing? So according to one of the greatest authors in motivation theory, a psychologist called Rutger, locus of control, and locus comes from Latin, it means place, is the perception that we have of having more or less control over the events of our life, right? So imagine this. There is one day, you wake up, it's raining outside, you overslept a little bit. There are two possible scenarios here. You can either call your headmaster and say, well, it's raining, I overslept, nothing I can do because it's not my fault, I don't control the weather. Or you can call and say, well, I'll be there in 15 minutes, hang on. And that has to do with one of these two different locus of control. The first one is, if you have an external locus of control, you tend to believe that the results of things that happen, they are out of your control. They happen because they happen, because your experiences, they are the result of chance, of luck, of fate, of your zodiac sign, or because of a magic spell of some kind. But essentially, you tend to see that you're not really in control of the circumstances, right? You tend also not to be confident about your own knowledge and abilities, which makes a lot of sense, because if you're not in control of your circumstances, to what extent will your knowledge and abilities actually have an impact on that? One of the consequences of that is that you tend to seek validation before acting. You just want to make sure that what you are going to do fits the circumstances. Also, because of that, your actions might be influenced by people around you because you don't control the outcome. So you need to make sure that everyone is going to be comfortable with that. So this is what happens in general if you have a little more of an external locus of control. Now, if you have an internal locus of control, it's almost like you've got the opposite end of it, which is you believe that you control the outcomes, right? You also believe that your work and the things that you know, the things that you do will shape your experience. You also believe that you have the knowledge and skills for success. Like, okay, I've got this, I'm gonna go and I'll just do it. You also believe that you don't need to be validated by others before acting. And finally, you feel very much responsible for what you do. Which of the two would you say is the best locus of control to have? If you had to pick one, say, I want to have this type of locus of control. Can you share that with us in the chat, internal? Everyone goes for internal. Every time I talk about this, everyone goes for internal because what? That's what in general we tend to think that people expect from us, right? In general. However, there is a quote that my grandmother, my late grandmother, fantastic human being, one of the smartest people I've ever met, used to say, every single body that you will find frozen in the Everest was once upon a time a highly motivated individual. Ideally, you will find a balance between an external locus of control and an internal locus of control. If you are extreme in your locus of control, what happens is either you are going to be too laid back because you don't take any responsibility for anything that you do, or you will go to the other extreme. You will feel too responsible for everything. And you are so intertwined with the idea that you control all of the outcomes that your behavior can actually become very irresponsible, right? So let's imagine the following. Kari works with me. She comes and says, well, I noticed that we have someone from Albania, and I don't speak a word of Albanian. And she says that, well, we've got a new client in Albania, and we're going to do a product demo there. How are you with your Albanian? And I go like, well, I don't really speak Albanian, but there is nothing that I cannot master in 2 weeks. So why don't you schedule this presentation for 2 weeks? And I go there and I just decide to do the presentation in Albanian. I'm pretty sure that regardless of what my belief might be as to what my abilities in language learning will happen there, but I don't think I can master Albanian in 2 weeks. I don't think I can master any language in 2 weeks. So if you're too self-confident, if your locus of control is extremely internal, it will be irresponsible. But the opposite is also true. We've all have had those students who look at us as well. I'm not learning because of you, the teacher. You are not teaching me. And that's the other end of it, right? So no, you're also responsible for that. Now, bottom line here, the importance of us being aware of where we might lean more towards, whether we tend to have a more of an external locus of control or an internal locus of control, it can be quite important in the sense of us becoming more aware of our potential flaws in determining our level of accountability in the things that we do, right? So we have to reflect and think, okay, is this my role? Do I have control over these circumstances? Because very often we do. So this is one of the reasons why making students understand their role in learning, even when they're kids, and understanding that they are also partially responsible for their own learning experience is essential, because you as a teacher do not control all of the variables, right? There is an interesting comment by Bruno here. We don't control everything, but not because of what we should leave it to chance. We must work to go through the path we intend. Yes, that's true. We need to ensure that we understand what the variables are and what the accountability should be to all the stakeholders involved, both teachers and students and families and school administrators as well, because all of those people play a significant part when it comes to the learning process, right? When it comes to the student's learning experience. It doesn't matter how motivated you are as a teacher, if your students are zero interested. But also, if your students are zero interested, it is worth thinking what your responsibility as a teacher might be. Because if your students are zero interested, there is something wrong, right? So we've just discussed locus of control, and we are going to discuss the second pillar. Do you remember what the second pillar was? Let's see if you're with me, if you're paying attention. That was exactly self-efficacy. Thank you very much, Ana Maria. Thank you, Alan. Okay, what is self-efficacy? Excuse me. It is exactly what it says. It's the perception that we have of being or not being able to do something, right? It's quite interesting that, going back to my Everest example, some people will believe that they can actually climb the Everest, right? Whereas if you ask me, it's like, can you climb the Everest? I was like, well, if I can go for a run around the block, I'll be happy enough. So how is it that some people, they just have this element of, this perception, the self-perception of efficacy? How do we assess it ourselves? What will make us think that we are able or not to do something? So The idea of self-efficacy is essentially rooted in four different elements. And according to literature, they are, and I'm going to start from the left side, they are first determined by performance outcomes. So positive and negative experiences that we have in our life, they are very likely to influence the ability that we have to do something. So I don't know if you like cooking. I really like cooking. It's one of my favorite pastimes. But nobody has ever had as a first dish, say, a very complicated French cuisine dish, right? We might, as kids, start with, I don't know, scrambled eggs or tapioca or something too similar to those, one ingredient only dishes. And actually, scrambled eggs can be quite difficult to make if you make them well enough. But the more you repeat those experiences, the more cooking you do, the better you become at cooking. Now, when you master your first language, your second language, because you've mastered it, you feel that a third language is much easier to learn. And the fourth language, it's also much easier to learn. It's quite interesting to realize that most people who speak a second language well, they have some level of understanding of several other languages, even if it's just like greetings or keywords or a word here or there. And it's not because you are intrinsically good at it. It's because you've already mastered a second language, and then you understand how language learning works. And mastering a third and the fourth and the fifth language gets much easier, right? So what does that mean in terms of learning? Well, we need to ensure that our students have positive experiences. And by allowing them to have positive experiences, they become better students themselves. So this is one of the reasons why we start grading language from the beginning. And then we start we start removing the scaffolds in the learning experience, right? So these are the performance outcomes. The more successful you are, the more successful you're likely to become in the future. Now, then we have what Bandria calls those vicarious experiences. What are those vicarious experiences? We tend to develop higher self, low efficacy through other people's performances as well. So we analyze our own performances, sometimes not consciously, but if you see a peer of yours failing at something or succeeding at something, you are more or less likely to think that you can do it yourself. So I learned to drive very late in life. I was 25 when I learned to drive, and I always thought that I wasn't able to drive. One of the reasons for that, it was that I learned, and then I failed my first driving test, and the second, and the third, and we're not going to go there. But a few years later, my baby brother, who's 5 years younger than I am, went to driving school, learned to drive, passed his test. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That's my baby brother. He's not even that smart. If he can do it, I can do it myself. That vicarious experience boosted my confidence in trying again. So whenever we see someone experiencing something that goes well and we identify ourselves with those people, we tend to find ourselves as able to do it as well. And then we have, going back to the left side, the verbal persuasion. What we say to our students matters, both positively and negatively. And I'm going to start with like a simple example. You know, one of those things that we say to our students, oh, no, that's easy. We see a student struggling, kids there really trying to master verb tenses, struggling a lot with the past perfect. And you go there and say, whoa, that's quite easy, isn't it? And he goes like, well, not really. That's not easy at all. But when you say that's easy, you are implicitly telling that student that's easy, you don't know how to do it because you can't. The same thing happens when we say you are wrong. the feeling that gives is like, whoa, wait a second. The person might not be right, but a bit of hedging is always beneficial. And what I'm saying here is that we shouldn't lie to students, but we cannot be overly critical as well, right? So this is one of the things that we need to bear in mind. What we say matters. What we essentially what we get to tell our students will have a massive impact on their motivation to learn. And the way we address our students, exactly the way we treat our students as well, Cecilia. And the way we address our students, the way we make them feel, the way we cherish their performance, will make them experience physical and physiological feedback. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you know when you're too hungry, you're really hungry, you haven't had lunch, and then it's almost dinner time, somebody comes to you with some delicious looking food, and you just start salivating, right? You can't even control it. The same happens when you're terrified of something. I personally, if I'm too nervous, I start sweating immediately. You can instantly say if I'm really nervous because I start sweating here. And I've tried really hard, and I do not have control over this because the physiological feedback that we experience is very often beyond our control. So people will experience sensations from their body, and how they perceive this emotional arousal will influence their beliefs of efficacy. So several years ago, I was swimming back in my hometown. I met a shark. I instantly froze, could not learn to swim after that because every time I enter the ocean, I kind of like freeze because I remember the shark. It's really hard to control that, but that can be helped. As long as, and this is the bottom line, if you forget everything else that I've said, this is the core element. Learners with more successful experiences, they tend to have higher self-efficacy than learners with frequent negative experiences. So once I said this in a talk, and someone said, "Well, are you telling me that I should lie to my students?" So just praise them for not being too good. I was like, not really, but we can create experiences in which our students will be successful. We can give them positive feedback whenever possible. And yes, Javier, socioeconomic factors and emotional management will definitely affect us as well. And we are the ones who sometimes will have to work with that and mitigate the negative impact that those factors might have on our students, right? Stressing the fact that they are in a safe learning environment and trying to provide them with successful experiences of learning so that we don't traumatize them. In many cultures, in many very and highly competitive cultures, kids, they tend to develop very serious traumas because their positive experiences are not cherished enough. And there are several countries which are reviewing this. There are certain cultures which are highly competitive that over the past 5 years, past 10 years or so, they experienced serious mental issues. Kids were experiencing serious mental issues because essentially they were having so many bad experiences in their learning experiences that they were just traumatized. And this is something that we have to mitigate. Because as Andres had in the chat now, they can try their best, make mistakes, and improve their skills. That's what we should be focusing at, right? If a kid is 10% better tomorrow than he or she was today, this is something to cherish, definitely. So we've talked about locus of control, which is our perception of being or not in control of our variables or of our circumstances. We talked about the idea of self-efficacy, and we are now going to talk about what was it? Do you remember? That's sad puppy, just for the It's our, thank you, it's learned helplessness. So what is that? I don't know if you know how baby elephants are trained. Elephants, they are probably the biggest animal that you will find in wildlife. They weigh several tons. They could bring a building down if they wished to do so, right? So they are big, strong, powerful animals. But a baby elephant is not that big, and it can be controlled, right? It's a baby elephant. I mean, first of all, it's terribly cute. And what happens there is that when a baby elephant is born, a trainer will tie a piece of rope around one of its paws, and then it will attach it to a tree. And the baby elephant will, of course, struggle a little bit and try to set him or herself free from that rope. And of course, because it's a baby elephant, it won't be able to. But eventually, it will stop trying because it has tried so many times to set itself free and wasn't able to. So, well, I'll just give up. Why should I continue with this? Because if it's clearly not working, eventually I'll just have to give up. But what happens is, when the baby elephant becomes a full-sized elephant, it's a big elephant, an elephant that will weigh 2-3 tons, that elephant could very easily set itself free, just, break the rope, probably bring the tree down with it, because it's a big elephant. Now, because of the idea of learned helplessness, it has learned to be helpless. It will stop trying. And that elephant becomes conditioned to life to stop trying. And we do that with several things in our lives. I've met people who said, well, I can't drive, which was me not too many years ago. I can't swim. I can't learn English. Why? Well, because I've tried and it didn't work. Fair enough. But what if you tried in a different way? So if you're working with adults, especially, or with young adults who have had many negative experiences in life related to either learning English or learning in general, and that happens quite often, a person just says, well, I can't learn. I can't read. I don't read books. Maybe our job here is to try and encourage this person to understand that he or she is able to do that. Perhaps by sharing success stories so that that person can learn, can develop a higher sense of self-efficacy. Because the moment we revisit the idea of self-efficacy and we make that student understand that he or she is able of doing something, will break the learned helplessness chain, right? The moment we break the learned helplessness chain, that student will blossom. The advantage here is that when we are working, especially with teenagers and kids, they usually have not yet developed any sense of learned helplessness. They might be at early stages of doing so, but it's much easier to revert that. If you're working with older adults, and I've worked several times with people who were in their late 70s, sometimes trying to learn a language, and they go like, I can't learn English. That's not for me. No, yes, you can. And perhaps you might not be able to deliver a lecture at Cambridge University, but you might be able to order food at a restaurant if you master this. Sometimes we have to adjust our way of teaching and trying to think of the techniques that will help the student set him or herself free from the chains of learned helplessness. Good. So we've established what the three pillars of motivation are, right? So we talked about locus of control, we talked about self-efficacy, we talked about learned helplessness. Now, when we talk about motivation, essentially, and in a nutshell, we have two main kinds of motivation, right? We have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And it's self-explanatory, really. Intrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from within. Extrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from external factors. As human beings, and if you've studied pedagogy, you will probably have read about behaviorism and how that works. We can be conditioned to certain things, right? And this is one of the core values of extrinsic motivation. It is that you are motivated and encouraged by external stimuli to do certain things. And there was quite an interesting experiment that was performed, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s by 3 psychologists. Highly suggest that you look them up and you read this study. And they developed a theory that's called the over-justification hypothesis. What is the over-justification hypothesis? So these 3 social psychologists, they got essentially 3 groups of kids to draw, right? One of the things that kids like doing is drawing. So you give them a piece of paper, few crayons, and they'll be there for hours drawing. To the first group number 1, they gave them pieces of paper, sheets of paper, and a bunch of crayons. Said, well, go and draw. What did the kids do? They went on and started drawing, right? They were happy, giggling, doing the thing. Now, to the second group, they gave the same set of instructions, and at times, and that was quite random, they would come and give those kids certain rewards. Kid would hand in a nice drawing and would get a golden star or candy or whatever. But that was random. Sometimes the kids would get, sometimes the kids would not get a reward. And to the third group, whenever the kids handed in a new drawing, they would get a reward. What they realized at the end of this several weeks long experiment, it was the third group started producing things, the group which were always getting rewards, they started producing much faster drawings, but they stopped showing signs of enjoyment and happiness. And they started displaying behavior that was potentially unethical because they just wanted the reward. They were like, okay, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I just want to get the golden star, the new crayon, or the candy that you promised me. The second group wasn't as affected. And the first group was just happy. And they were just happy doing what they were doing. They were intrinsically motivated to draw because there was intrinsic joy, there was intrinsic enjoyment and happiness in the act of drawing, right? They were exercising their creativity, their happiness. Now, the over-justification hypothesis then points to the fact that sometimes when we reward people for doing things that they will enjoy doing anyway, we actually kill motivation. So as a teacher, sometimes when we give students a piece of candy, a little chocolate or something for doing something that they should be doing anyway, and that they might enjoy doing anyway, we might actually be killing their joy in the process, right? And I agree with you entirely, Maria Jose. There was an interesting comment in the chat box. We must focus more in the process and progress than in the outcome. That's definitely true, right? Whenever, if we look at the experience if we look at the path more thoroughly than at the final outcome, learning becomes a more pleasurable, more exciting element. But as teachers, and I'm going to say this, I think most of us tend to agree with the over-justification hypothesis, and we totally see this. Like, okay, no, of course, my kids, they're happy the way they are. They don't need those external motivators, right? However, as teachers, we I think we don't do this too well. We love carrots and sticks. We use lots of external motivators. Just top of your mind, I mean, the moment I say external motivators, classroom, what comes to your mind? Can you type in? The first one I said it was Kenzie, but there are several other things, both positive, but also negative things. Oh, stickers, yes. So these are rewards. Mhm. Free time. Oh, what about the punishments? YouTube clips. Okay. Praise. Good. Um, this is one thing that okay, no risk says. Also, I don't know if that's a thing in many other countries, but in Brazil there is one thing that's highly effective as a punishment for this. I'm going to call your parents, or I'm going to send you to the principal's office, right? Now, this is a very seductive thing because it works. All of those external motivators, and here I'm talking about tests, I'm talking about certificates, I'm talking about gifts, rewards, promises. Like if you behave in class, it will have a 5-minute game at the end of the lesson. If you don't behave today, I'm going to call your parents. So the problem here is that those things, they really work. And we can see an immediate effect, whereas intrinsic motivation takes quite some time to build, right? Intrinsic motivation is way more challenging because it's not a one-off thing. The downside of extrinsic motivation is that while it works, it also stops working very quickly. One of the greatest motivators people will have in life is fear. If you're afraid of something, you will comply very quickly. Your level of compliance will become instantly very high because you're feeling threatened. However, the levels of cortisol that are released when that happens, they'll just make your experience so dreadful that that's not sustainable as time goes by. It will wear off because you will feel exhausted. The same goes for the positive side as well. At first, you're very happy with that first candy that you got, but a week later, you want 2 different types of candy. 5 months later, you might have to bring in a full bag of candy to every single student. I don't think that's too healthy. So, what are the implications of that when it comes to teaching and learning? What do we do as teachers? Well, I'm going to go back to something very basic, known as the Maslow Pyramid, right? It's probably one of the most cliche things in motivation, but also one of the truest. What Maslow says is that as human beings, and that goes from to a 110-year-old person, we are all looking for in life for self-actualization. What is that? We want to feel good. Feeling good is a part of human nature, regardless of culture, because the idea of feeling good is culture dependent, right? It depends. In Brazil, it will mean something. If you go to Colombia, it will mean something else. If you are in Japan, it will definitely mean something totally different. But the concept of self-actualization is quite universal. But we can only get to the self-actualization point in our lives, regardless of whether you're a kid or you're a grown person, if all of the other layers in the pyramid have been met, right? So first we have our physiological needs. Those needs, they need to be met. If you are thirsty, if you're hungry, if you need to go to the bathroom, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being at a meeting when you really have to go to the bathroom, you cannot think of anything else. The only thing that you can think of is that I really need to go to the bathroom, right? So if your physiological needs are not met, no learning will take place. There will be no motivation whatsoever. Why? Because kids have bigger fish to fry. The kid's hungry. The kid's thirsty or sleepy. Nothing is going to happen. Now, we also have our safety needs that have to be met. You need to feel physically safe. You need to be sheltered. You need to be able to afford your basic needs. You also need to feel that you are loved and that you belong somewhere. If you feel rejected by your group, if you feel that your contributions are not validated by members of your immediate community, and that might be your group of your peers, that might be your colleagues at work, it doesn't matter. You need to feel validated. And as human beings, we seek that validation because we are social beings. It doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. The amount of validation you seek is different, but you need a certain level of validation and you need to feel that you're loved. And if you feel that you are loved, you will essentially understand that you are a contributing member of that society, and you will feel esteem. The moment that you understand that your contribution is validated, you start working towards making that group, that small society, and that small society might be your classmates. You will work with them because that makes you happy. That brings that will take you towards the feeling of self-actualization, right? There's one thing that Bruno said: keeping kids from experiencing negative things for protection, such as hearing no, losing game. Yes, this is a very bad thing. Frustration is a part of life. We cannot lie both ways. We cannot over punish, but we cannot also lie to kids saying, well, no, you're doing fantastic, and then there is a test the kid fails. That's what we are creating, little monsters if we do that. Not being able to do things and failing is a part of learning experiences as well. But bottom line here is, as people, we are intrinsically geared towards three things. We want to have autonomy from kids. We want to be able to make choices. We want to be to feel that we are responsible for certain things. As a kid, you might be responsible for naming something in your class. You might be responsible for working with your teacher to organize your learning experience. You might be responsible for choosing something that's going to happen in class, but you need to somehow feel that your choices matter. If everything is chosen for you, there is no accountability. If there is no accountability, then why should you care? It's already chosen for you. We want to know things. We love the mastery of things, especially if we are in love with something. If you like a certain topic, you want to learn more about it. We are intrinsically curious. We are intrinsically motivated to learn a little bit more and understand a little bit more about things. But we can only do that if we can find a purpose for that. So I remember when I was studying maths at school, and that was decades ago. I still do not like maths. I understand the validity and the purpose, and I need maths today in my life. But I remember that when I was studying maths at school, I was studying maths for the sake of studying maths. I was memorizing things such as equation formulas and all those things, which were useless to, well, I was what, 10, 12 when I started learning those things, but that was useless. And I could never understand the purpose of that. That kind of like made me dislike maths. I was a fairly good student, but I just didn't like it. I was like, what's the purpose of it? I really wish my teachers had told me that 15 years ago and posed things as actual projects and or problems that talked to my reality to solve. Joy was so focused on helping the girl that she took long to understand the importance of sadness. Exactly. We have those elements to take care of. So in a nutshell, we are very much responsible for the way our students feel through our verbal persuasion and through our understanding of what their needs might be, right? It is our role to empower them to understand what their role is, so that they develop autonomy to look for mastery and understand what the purpose of what we are doing in class. We are about to wrap up, and we are going to open for questions. If you have any, I mean, I've been keeping an eye on the chat, made a few remarks, but if there are any specific questions that you have or that you would like to ask, this is the moment. Please do so. Thank you for that, Bruno. Okay, good. So without much further ado, I am going to give the word back to Kari.
Okay, well, thank you for that incredible talk. Paulo was really very, very useful and leaves us thinking about many things, really. Okay, well, thank you again, everybody, for joining this afternoon. So we will have a future webinar, so at the end of August. So the next two webinars will be connected to educational leadership. So if you're interested in the topic, you will have two different topics related to that. And the first one will be delivered by Katerina at the end of August, so you're invited to join us. We will be sending more information during the next month. And the other thing I wanted to share with you before we go is we have a program, an ambassadors program. So basically, you are invited to join. So you can scan this QR code you can see here on the screen. Basically, we offered our ambassadors different benefits. So you have some benefits listed here. So basically, you're definitely more than happy to join. So we definitely wait for information, yes, to send you more details about it. Okay, and then my final remarks for today are, first of all, well, remember to register for our next webinar during July. Remember, we have all July and August to prepare for it. We will be sending more information by email in the following weeks. Most people, all the people that were here today in the live event will receive a certificate. So we will be contacting you by email with your certificate next week. And then, well, just to remember, we have these ambassador programs. If you haven't scanned the QR code, it's still there, so you still have the chance to join. And thank you again. Thank you, Paulo, for being here today. Thank you, everyone, from, well, just joining everywhere from the world. So we have representation from all over the world. And, well, see you in the next webinar then. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye. Thank you for joining. Bye.